Welcome to episode 6 of the Credit You Deserve podcast. I'm David Murphy, president of Marshfield Medical Center Credit Union. And today's episode features our first return guest. So we have Trevor Neufeld from Neufeld Capital Management joining us again today. And we thought that this was a relevant topic because this law was just passed a couple of weeks ago. But some of you may have heard of the Secure Act 2.0, which was included in one of the largest bills that was signed into law here at the end of December in 2022. And so the Secure Act 2.0 bill covers a lot of topics related to retirement and some of the instruments that are used for retirement. And so as we're getting into the new year and a lot of people are starting to think about resolutions and changes, we just thought it was a relevant time to not only talk about opportunities to start thinking about investing for the future, but also what the changes in this bill actually mean for some of those goals that you may be achieving. And so, Trevor, welcome back.
Yeah,
Glad to have you back on the show.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, Secure Act 2.0. It's a pretty big deal. There was the first Secure Act that was passed back in 2019. So some of this continues some of the themes that were highlighted in that first bill. So what can you tell us about the Secure Act 2.0?
Yeah, and I think the reason we're talking about it, I know most people might not be as interested in tax bills and government law and finance as we are,
right.
But this really is relevant for quite a bit of people and spanning from 18-year-olds to 75-year-olds as far as who it impacts. So in the scheme of retirement planning, there's a lot of different things it was touched on. And follow up from the 2019 bill. So this was passed at the end of 2022. Some of the first changes are already in place in 2023, and then we'll see that they have set up some changes to unfold over the course of the next few years, and even 10 years down the road.
So because the bill does span a wide range, whether it's age groups or the fact that some of the provisions are out several years, if you could sum up what this bill covers in one or two sentences, what would that be?
Yeah, I would say it's an expansion and adding in some flexibility to retirement planning. So I think in some areas the government's just tweaking some numbers that need to be tweaked every few years because of inflation. Obviously, everyone's kind of aware of inflation in the past year or so with the big numbers that we've seen. And so because of that, the way with retirement planning and specifically contribution limits and things like that we do need to adjust those over time so people are still getting bang for their buck. With that. So expanding what people can do and how they can save for retirement, and then also just some updating of things.
Well, that seems like a good thing. Where would you like to start with this bill?
Yeah, well, last time we talked about 529s and specifically, saving for college. And this is one of my favorite parts of the bill, I think, because it's the most, one of the more surprising parts is a big change the government made to 529 plans. So previously when we were talking about, whether it's your grandparent or a parent opening up a 529 for your kid, or a ROTH or an UTMA, and you have all these options, and you're really picking a fork in the road, and you have to choose a way, which is kind of hard when you don't know what your 4-year-old wants to go as far as career path, right? So the government made a big change here with 529s, where after it's been open for 15 years, you can start to roll over some of your 529 funds into a ROTH IRA. So that's really unique. That's previously not able to do that. If you didn't use your 529 funds and you had to pull those out for non-educational purposes, you'd be paying taxes on that. And now you're able to move those into a ROTH and not pay taxes on that. And eventually now you're working towards retirement, which funds that you didn't use for college. So.
Yeah, it seems like it makes the 529 a more attractive product ultimately for parents or grandparents or whoever, because it doesn't earmark those funds you identified specific to education.
It absolutely does, because you can move over the 529, and it's a limit of $35,000, and then when you move it over, the funds you move over have to have been in there for 5 years, and you can only do it up to the ROTH contribution limits for that year. So there's some provisions. But not only can you move it to a ROTH, but then the ROTH has its own flexibility, which with the ROTH, you can pull out the first $10,000 for a first-time home purchase and things like that. So it absolutely, for me, if I'm talking to parents and having that conversation, there's a lot more reason to lean 529 because of this.
Yeah, great added flexibility is always a great thing. And so increasing those options is definitely good news for parents and grandparents thinking ahead for their children's education. There's also been some changes that have been made to 401k plans or 403b, depending on what industry you work in, and saving in general through employer-sponsored plans. Can you touch base on what some of those changes are?
Yep, and this is, so starting out, one of the things too to help people with this education dilemma is sometimes when people graduate college, they've got a ton of student loan debt, they've come onto an employer who's offering benefits like a 401k match, and they have to decide whether they want to contribute to their plan or pay off their student loans. And now the government's allowed this to be a case where an employer could actually match someone's student loan payments as the employer's match into the contribution into that plan. So that's a unique thing. Again, a little bit of a fork in the road that the government's brought together and said, oh, you can have a little bit of the best of both worlds. So that's one of the initial changes. Some of them are just updates to how much you can contribute. So they raised the catch-up contributions to $7,500. So when you're contributing, you have your normal limits that you can contribute, and then once you get to age 50, you're able to contribute an additional amount, and they raise that additional amount. So $7,500. And also starting in 2025, if you're between the ages of 60 and 63, that goes up to $10,000 or either the greater of $10,000 or 50% more than what your catch-up contribution is. So kind of some interesting math in there, but ultimately what the government's allowing for is additional contributions at the end of someone's working years, which is a lot of times when they're making the most money, and maybe they weren't able to contribute when they were younger, but now they have the opportunity to put increased amounts in.
Sure.
So within employer plans, that's definitely been a benefit for people.
I also saw that they're to encourage employees to start to save for retirement, that they are, maybe you can clarify this for me a little bit. Are they making it mandatory for employers to actually automatically enroll employees into their prospective 401k, 403b plans, or how is that being structured? Because I know that there's some language within the bill that discusses that.
Yeah, so instead of mandatory enrollment being the exception to the rule, that's going to, for the most people, going forward, starting in 2025, that's going to be the norm for most large employers, 401k plans and things like that, where when a person comes on, they're going to be enrolled in their 401k and actually have to opt out of it to not do it. So I think that's trying to help the person who's not thinking retirement and maybe just pushing things off to the side instead of them making them have to do an active step to be contributing. Now it's just going to be the norm and they'd have to decide not to.
Sure, that sounds good. There are other provisions in this bill that cover retirement plans that don't fall underneath those employer-sponsored ones. Do you want to touch base on some of the opportunities that fall outside of that scope?
Yeah, and also before I forget too, one of the things with catch-up contributions is if you're over an income of $145,000, your catch-up contribution is actually going to be treated as ROTH. So that's something to be aware of.
Sure.
And that is a big deal tax-wise. You're no longer getting that deferral of taxes, but at the end of the day, at least you're still able to contribute more. For less common employee plans or employer plans like a SEP or a simple IRA, they've opened up the ROTH as something that you can use. So previously, simple and SEPs had just been traditional pre-tax options. So there's been a lot of talk around ROTH in the past few years. I would say anyone who's kind of got an ear to the financial world has heard the buzz around it, and definitely rightfully so. It's something we talk about a lot. So this is a cool thing to see that they're going to have simple and SEP ROTHs. So again, with the theme of contribution numbers, something that they're doing starting in 2024 for just regular IRAs outside of employer plans is they're going to be indexed for inflation. So inflation's been a big deal for a lot of people this year. Again, something most people are aware of.
Right.
And that's the thing is if your contribution limit is $6,000 one year, that same $6,000 contribution limit spread over 10 years becomes less and less important and effective. So we want that to be indexed to inflation, especially when inflation's a significant number. So that's a small change and something that you kind of expect the government to do over time, but they did it.
Sure. And to go back a step, I know you talked about, it seems like with some of the language in this bill that the concept of the ROTH, whether it's within the 401k plan or an IRA, is being a little bit more emphasized. Do you see that that's going to lead to an increase in maybe even inquiries or just information about like ROTH conversion plans? Just because maybe despite the fact that ROTHs have been around for several years, we still, even here at the credit union, we still hear people who don't necessarily understand what a ROTH is. And now that they're becoming a little bit more mainstream, if you want to call it that, do you see that there's going to be more conversations centered around that idea of like, oh, so you mean all this money that I've been saving up in my traditional plan, whatever, I'm not close to retirement, but maybe I do start to convert that over and realize some of the tax benefit potentially. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, I think the general trend over time is, a lot of the employees from the clinic or hospital, when they first started, there wasn't even a Roth option for their 401k contributions. And that's actually good that you bring that up, is one of the changes they made that I forgot to mention is now an employer. So if you're working at the clinic and you're contributing to your Roth and that's all you're contributing to, your employer, the clinic, is still matching in your pre-tax. The government's now allowed this to happen where the employer can match you via Roth. So again, it's another expansion of Roth, and I think hopefully over time, because it's more present, people are going to become more aware. And just the conversations, if you're working with an advisor, that's something that they're probably bringing up to you. But unfortunately, it's not like there's a class everyone's having after work where they're like learning about Roth conversions and such. But it is something to be aware of and definitely beneficial. And I think that some of what's happening here with the expansion of Roth is because of the conversations that people are more and more aware of the importance of it in a retirement plan. And so the government wants that to be inclusive of more people. And of course, that's taxable revenue for the government in that year, which isn't it's not a bad thing for us or them. So, yeah, it's a good change.
Yeah, I would encourage anyone listening to this episode, if you have any questions about if a Roth product is good for you in the first place, but also this idea of a Roth conversion, because it is a complicated subject. And I know we touched base a little bit on it on our last episode together, but I know you guys do a really good job of explaining this and having these conversations with individuals who may have more questions about that. And I would really encourage people to reach out and talk to someone about this, because I think there's a lot of benefits to it, but it's not just as simple as snapping your fingers and flipping a switch and it automatically switches over, because there's a lot more to take into account with those.
Yeah, I would say Roth conversions, there's a lot of people that they would be beneficial, but there's a lot of things you can do right or wrong. So making sure you understand the implications of a Roth conversion and how that's going to affect your taxes and what you're paying in is important year to year. And that changes year to year based on individual circumstances. And, as we've seen, the government makes changes in tax laws.
Sure.
So if they make a change, that could affect what's best for you too.
Right. So. Makes sense. So now we've talked about, if you're actively working or you're setting up the retirement plan, whatnot. How about specifically for those individuals who are either nearing the end of their working careers and or are in retirement and are starting to talk about RMDs, or required minimum distributions? What changes to those components of the retirement plans have been introduced as a result of this bill?
Yeah, a decent amount. And just to clarify too, because I throw the word RMD in this financial world, we have so many acronyms sometimes.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes you forget which ones are normal for people to hear and which ones need to be defined. So for the people who aren't aware, like an RMD is something that starts historically, it started when you were 70 and a half. 5 years ago, that was the age. They made a change, moved it up to 72, and now it's to 73, and we'll talk about more of that. But what a required minimum distribution is the government looking at all of your pre-tax assets. So everything that's been tax deferred that you've never been taxed on. And when you reach a certain age, they're saying, okay, it's our money and we want it back. So you never paid taxes, and they're going to start making you withdraw a certain amount of money from those pre-tax assets each year, so that becomes taxable revenue for them. So something to be aware of. I talk with people all the time who had no idea that when they reach, previously 72, they were going to have to withdraw money from their accounts, whether they need it or not. And not only that, but it's pre-tax account, so it's going to be taxable. And of course, that has a lot of implications across the board. So what they've done is, starting in 2023, if you have not reached the age of 72 yet, now that age that required minimum distribution starts is 73. They've also put a provision where when you go all the way out to 2033, if you're not 73 yet at that point, then the age becomes 75. And really the reason they're expanding this is just because of life expectancy increases. So it's one of those things that you kind of expect to happen over time because people are living longer, so you want to give more time to take those out. It is a benefit to people because there's a lot to do in retirement with tax planning and what your income is and how that affects your Social Security and a lot of different factors with that. So having a few more years where you're not required to take out specific amounts of money is important and helpful. So another good thing. The couple positives, that there used to be a 50% penalty.
Wow.
So if you forgot to take out your RMDs in a year, at what you needed to take out, there's a 50% penalty on that. So that's a huge hit because you're paying taxes on it as well. So you pay 20% taxes, 50% penalty, and pretty soon that's you're getting 30 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, your money's no longer your money, right?
Not at all. So they lowered that to 25, and if you correct it in time, it's down to 10.
Okay.
So that's a little bit of a less of a harsh hand coming down on people who make mistakes in that area. Again, that's, RMDs aren't simple all the time, especially if you have quite a few accounts.
Mm-hmm.
So having an advisor help you with that is definitely something I'd recommend. They took RMDs off of Roth plans, so we talked a lot about the expansion of Roth plans in employer places and how that's a good thing for people. There was a strange rule where even though Roth is post-tax assets that if you follow the rules you're not paying taxes on, when you take it out, you still had required minimum distributions on your Roth assets. Not something that made a lot of sense. You could roll it into a Roth IRA and not have those RMDs, but they took it off. They took that off. So it's just a kind of a fix that was, why did that take long?
Right.
I just stumbled over words a little bit there. Why wasn't that fixed previously? But good to see it taken care of.
Yeah, I didn't realize that until I was doing a little research for this conversation that was even in place. I just assumed that because it was a Roth, even if it didn't matter if it was an employer-sponsored retirement plan or not, I didn't realize that they had RMDs for those. So yeah, it is good to see that they removed that requirement because there really is no reason, because the tax has already been paid, so there's no deferred tax that they're trying to recognize. So kind of a strange that they would even put it in there in the first place, but I guess kudos to them for fixing it and taking it back out.
Better late than never. And with that being said, talking about Roth a lot, one thing to keep in mind, there's different rules with Roth that people aren't aware of, like a 5-year rule, and that 5-year rule not being the same in a 401k as it is in an IRA. So as we're talking about Roth and people have probably already heard of it and they're thinking about conversions, again, I'd lean them towards get an advisor who works with, understands how Roth works with taxes and knows all the rules around that, because you obviously don't want to make a decision like, oh, I just heard it, I should do Roth conversions and do that and not realize any of the implications. So just want to put that out there for people.
Yeah, definitely. So it really sounds like the bill itself does introduce a lot of good concepts or positive concepts for the average consumer. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's, the government's not always going to have an incentive to help people save for retirement, because the more that people provide for themselves in retirement, the less they're dependent on government programs, saves government money in the long run. So you can see that working out, where I think the government's making some updates, some tweaks that should come along, and then also expanding some things that are just helpful overall. So that's how I present this when I talk to people about it. There's not really too many drawbacks for the average, working individual or retired individual when it comes to this plan.
So here's the curveball I'm going to throw you that I didn't ask before so we've had Secure Act 1.0, and now we've had Secure Act 2.0. Is this something that, so it's been 4 years or 3 years since we've seen the first one pass. Do you think that this is something that we're going to see every couple of years because of the emphasis placed on planning for retirement?
Always dangerous to try to predict.
Yeah, I know what I'm asking is.
But I think it makes sense that every few years we would see the government release something that are small tweaks like this. Things that there's people in the industry that are like, with the RMDs on the 401k, it's like, why did that exist? So it makes sense that they would make tweaks. Numbers are going to have to be adjusted. We'll see life expectancy grow over time. That's the trend. So inflation and how that affects, and what we see as general trend in our economic world, we're going to make adjustments to that so that our retirement plans help people and don't become obsolete. So I think we'll see things, whether it's always branded the Secure Act 2.0, the Secure Act 3.0. You know how movies are. You got the Iron Man 2.
Oh, yeah.
Throw out a different name. That was a bad example because it's Iron Man 3 too, but
I gotcha.
Yeah, and you can see a little bit of that in this act where they said all the way out into 2033, as if when they change RMDs to 75, it feels like the government's saying, if things get so gridlocked that we're not able to pass a bill in the next 10 years, at least RMDs will adjust automatically since we worked it into here. So
right.
I think they're already looking forward to that in a sense.
Well, in a lot of bills, not necessarily with the Secure Act, but a lot of bills, they build in provisions that sunset after so long. And a lot of them that are coming up here over the next 3 to 5 years, let's just say, are centered around the idea of retirement and with some of these plans. So we may see that may be the next step, is addressing some of those issues that are sunsetting potentially.
Yep. If people aren't aware, the Tax Cut and Job Act in 2017 is sunsetting at the end of 2025. So we're going to see some big changes in tax law. Whether or not the government makes any changes, it wouldn't be surprising if they attempted to be proactive and decide exactly what those changes would be instead of just reverting back to what it was. But you never know. I mean, that has to go through. So
Right.
But
Anything else that you would like to cover about the Secure Act specifically, or maybe any of the higher level concepts that we discussed today?
One thing I forgot to mention is for lower income individuals, they've changed the savers credit to the savers match. So now if you're contributing to a retirement plan, the government will match 50% of your contributions up to $2,000. So that's got an income limit where you have to be below a certain threshold. But again, another benefit for people in that position, that's essentially an employer match from the government of 50% on the dollar up to $2,000.
Do we know, is that being handled directly on the tax return itself?
I believe so.
And then given back to the taxpayer? Okay.
So.
Anything that can help people think for the future. I know for a lot of people it's hard to think 30, 40 years down the road or even 20 years down the road, but it is important because you don't want to get to be 65, get ready to retire, and then realize that you can't financially afford to retire either.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like I said, this government's doing a good thing in a lot of these areas and just pushing people in the right direction or allowing them to do a better job in the direction they're already going in. But it is complicated, and we're just covering some of the big topics. There's more things packed into this bill. There's changes that'll be made in other bills and things that have already been in place. So I would just say for people saving for retirement, it really is important to meet with an advisor. We're an option. We're right down the road, Neufeld Capital Management. We work with a lot of credit union members, and so we're very familiar with the clinic plan and all of that. And we do taxes as well, so that's fairly helpful in this area. But if not us, someone to help you get in the right direction and make sure you're making good choices with your retirement planning.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we really appreciate the time today, Trevor, and it's good information that was easily digestible. I felt like I actually understood what was being discussed because sometimes this stuff can get really complex. And so I thought you did a really good job of just laying it out in a way that was very easily understandable for all of us. So thank you.
Good, thanks. Yeah, it was fun. I like doing this stuff, and I know it's great for some of us finance nerds to get together and talk about numbers and all
Nerds,
that.
speak for yourself, man. No, no, I'll join them on that. Again, if you have any questions on anything that we discussed here, either reach out to the credit union. We can't give tax advice out necessarily, but we're more than happy to try to address some of the concepts or questions that you have high level. Or as Trevor said, Neufeld Capital Management has great resources between Trevor and his dad, Chris, and his mom, Deanne, that are down there. They do a great job working with clients and whatnot, and so we would definitely recommend our members and whoever else is listening to this podcast, reach out to them, get your questions answered, make sure you're doing it the right way. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.